CAS Residential Schools by Jackie Fobister. The long-term effects of forcible assimilation. For decades in North America and Australia, Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in boarding schools. These schools had the slated goal of cultural assimilation and are perceived as educational failures. Lower post-residential school has been a daily reminder of pain and suffering for residents of the community and BC's far north. Hundreds of thousands of children in the United States, Canada, and Australia were affected by residential schools, and there have been federal government apologies, calls for compensation, scathing public inquiries, and evidence of physical and sexual abuse. In Canada, this resulted in the largest class action settlement in Canadian history. The exact number of lives lost is still unknown to this day, as many still do not receive any form of acknowledgement or compensation due to files being destroyed. Association CEO Mary Ballantyne acknowledged and apologized for the harmful role child welfare has played historically and continues to play in the lives of Ontario's Indigenous children, families, and communities. Indigenous participants, including survivors of the 60s scoop and residential schools, spoke to the gathering about the devastating impact the child welfare system had on their communities. The death of a 14-year-old girl, Azrea Kokopanas, in Kenora, Ontario, is an example of the way the federal government is failing First Nations children, according to NDP MP Charlie Angus. A Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling found that Canada discriminates against First Nation children on reserves by failing to provide the same level of child welfare services it does to other children. The broken child welfare system did not help her and her family, he said. It put her into foster care. The poor little girl ended up on the streets, dealt with police, was put in a hospital one night with no oversight or adult to look after her, and her body was found later. The 60s coup is the catch-all name for a series of policies enacted by provincial child welfare authorities starting in the mid-1950s, which saw thousands of Indigenous children taken from their homes and families, placed in foster homes. Many women reported being pressured by doctors, nurses, and social workers to give up their children shortly after birth. Residential school survivors speak out. I got strapped. I got beaten up for even speaking my own native tongue. I even had my tongue pulled out and pinched. My strongest memory there is when the little girl died beside me. She must have been about 6. I was scared that why the parents were not there, because they were never notified. At that time, they never told us that our sisters were across the hallway, and I didn't know that for the longest time. Then I spotted my sister Nora, and I was so glad and so hysteric, and I went running to her, and I reached out to her, and just hugged her, and I was just shaken and terrified, and I was wondering why she was pushing me away. I didn't realize that we weren't supposed to know that we both lived in the same place, and we weren't allowed to speak to each other. We weren't allowed to talk to each other. Then I can remember the principal grabbing a hold of me by the hand, then he stripped me and started whacking me with a long web strap, making an example of me. Indian culture is contradiction in terms. They are uncivilized. The aim of education is to destroy the Indian. Nicholas Flood, David Report, 1879. There are more children in Canada's child welfare system today than there was at the height of residential schools.